Thanks. Okay, so we're really excited and grateful to be here and have this opportunity. Architecture of Effortless Attention is an ongoing project, and it's grounded in a kind of multidisciplinary literature review and research, and it's being implemented through architectural design. So effortless attention is a concept that's been described in both scientific literature and other sources using a lot of different terms and definitions. So when we use this term, we're describing a psychologically restorative state during which investing more attention in an activity or environment is experienced as requiring fewer cognitive resources. So it's essentially what you feel when you find yourself kind of subconsciously attracted to something into your environment, and you're kind of sparked to engage with it more, investigate it more. And for that moment, you may have forgotten about your other kind of stress or your obligations that you have during that day. And a state of effortless attention restores cognitive resources and can help increase like happiness and productivity. So our team is myself, I'm Jana, and Aaron. We met as students at the Harvard Graduate School of Design. And since that time, I've started our own architecture practice named Curious Minds Los Angeles. And then Nancy Etkoff, unfortunately, is not able to be here with us, but she's a psychologist who holds positions at Harvard Medical School and also Mass General Hospital. So the cultural context in which our young architecture practice has been founded is heavily influenced by technology and media. And while on one hand we really love new technology and we embrace all of the possibilities that come with having personal devices and software, social media, on the other hand, there are studies like this one out of UT Austin that provide pretty clear evidence that smartphones also can really negatively impact our attention and our productivity. So it's within this context that we're defining our own values and our role as practicing architects, and we really feel like we should be designing spaces that help to restore a person's cognitive resources throughout the day. So the theory and the projects that we're currently developing are striving to identify strategies to design architecture that promotes effortless attention specifically. And for us, this is especially important to consider within the urban environments where the majority of people are living, working, gathering. And in the context of this presentation, we're going to only be able to touch very briefly on all of the kind of research sources that we're going to cite here and briefly mention. But we want to sort of outline the evidence that's brought us from this sort of initial research question to the kind of design strategies and hypotheses that we're currently developing. So there's extensive empirical evidence that supports the notion that people experience effortless attention when in contact with nature. And so we've actually looked to studies that have happened within the natural environment to try to learn from those and understand how to create better architecture in urban environments. There's two ways to explain why, generally speaking at least, walking along a lake in the woods or through a park is more psychologically restorative than walking through a city. On one hand, we're attracted to, just kind of subconsciously attracted to the contents of nature. Water and trees satisfy our basic needs for sustenance and for shelter. And that, on one hand, suggests that we should include these in all of our projects. But in addition to that, there's research that's shown that natural environments that most effectively promotes effortless attention, tend to exhibit specific physical qualities. So these spaces, on one hand, give people a sense of being away or removed from their kind of daily stress and obligations. They're physically compatible and manageable for the person who's navigating them. But when we're talking about a more general design strategy and we don't yet have a defined site or specific user, we feel like we can more effectively look at the issues of extent, mystery, and novelty in the spaces that we're designing. And so it's from this point that we then can begin to hypothesize about countless strategies to create a space that might exhibit these specific qualities. So while this is likely going to be a project that will continue for us throughout our careers, at present we focused on one specific concept called expansiveness. And the goal is to produce spaces that are perceived as being larger than, or even in some cases kind of infinite, but larger than their actual dimensions. And this is also a valuable design strategy in urban environments, for example, where space is often very limited. So for the theory we're developing to be useful both for ourselves and also for other designers, we've started cataloging specific strategies or specific techniques to create this effect. And at this point, we'll start to kind of talk about each of these techniques that we've identified using just precedent project photos that illustrate what these are. So the first one is physical growth. And this is, while on one hand, the most literal approach to creating a sense of expansiveness, designing a space that actually moves in order to become larger. Also context. So providing either a kind of generally recognizable object that people understand to be a certain scale by making it smaller than its standard scale, that therefore creates the perception of the surrounding environment being larger than it is in reality. Graphic illusion. So from more traditional kind of trompe-l'oeil techniques to more recent super graphics, we feel like surface treatments can drastically shift the perceived scale of a space. And then lastly, atmosphere. And while this is employed a lot more frequently in installation art than in architecture, atmospheric materials such as humidity, air particles, and light can completely conceal the boundaries of a space, giving the impression of a space that might extend indefinitely.
Okay, so there are three more methods of expansiveness that we're going to discuss: reflection, open edges, and physical illusion in the context of projects we've actually been working on in our office. So as a relatively young practice, we're taking every opportunity we can to begin implementing these ideas in the projects that we have. But because it can take many years to build a client base and to construct a building, we're using other types of projects that can be completed more quickly as a testing ground for these. And so the first expansive design strategy that we're implementing in our office that we'll discuss is reflection. So as seen in these precedents, mirrored surfaces can be a very simple yet effective way to visually expand a space. And so this project from our office is a set design for a performance that was produced in collaboration with a contemporary dance company. And live performance took place at the Architecture and Design Museum in LA. So in the space, we installed 4 rotating panels. Each panel was two-sided, with one surface being a mirror and the other a white fabric surface that would serve as a screen for projections. And the goal of the project was to use both projection and reflection as tools to reconstruct perceptions of the space, and in that sense, expand the space. The performance was conceived and choreographed as 3 sections, each implementing this idea in a different way. And so section 1 of the performance relied on a live feed of cameras in projecting feeds in combination with the mirrors on the panels. These elements were used to reflect the movement of the dancers and the audience, as well as projecting the view of a specific portion of the performance into one or more other locations in real time. And so these various diagrams were tools for our office to explore different ways these projections and reflections could change the perceived elevations of the space. So here we're going to see a short clip of section 1 of the performance, where you can see on the right side a projection of a dancer that's located elsewhere in the space, moving in conjunction with the dancer on the left. And on both sides, the panels are reflecting back the audience viewing the performance. So in section 2 of the performance, we took advantage of the rotating panel component. A central pivot point allowed mirrored surfaces to expand the space in a more dynamic way as dancers interacted with the set.
It's strange that I can feel you, though I've never seen into your eyes. We're the first one to know it, but you would be the last of your kind. Everything is happening for a reason. Could you be the reason?
And in the final section of the performance, we constructed a one-way mirror box where the effect of the infinity mirror happened inside where the dancer was located, but it could be viewed from the outside by the audience. So the second strategy we'll be discussing in the context of our office is the idea of open edges. Exemplified in the work of architects such as Todd Orlando or Mies van der Rohe, creating a space or a window along the edge where two surfaces meet, implying that a space extends beyond those extents of the walls and the ceilings. So this is a composition design we worked on, which involved creating a series of rooms and cultural spaces where visitors would visit various experiences along a continuous 1-mile walk. And so our schematic proposal integrated this idea of open edges within the floor plans of each of these individual spaces. In addition, we looked at the sectional qualities along this 1-mile path, where we used open edges as a tool to control light, compression and expansion, as well as the perception of floating volumes within the spaces. And in this image, you can see there's a space adjacent to this path where the edge between the ceiling and the wall is open to the sky. And in this final example, we'll discuss the use of physical illusion, and specifically forced perspective. So in both historic and contemporary precedents, forced perspective has been used to create the visual effect of a space that extends deeper than its actual dimensions. So we can trick the eye into thinking a space is larger than it is by adjusting the geometry of walls, floors, and ceilings. So on the left here, you can see every shape outlined with the black line weight will read with the same perspective that you're seeing on the right, given the same location of the viewer in each space. So we're exploring this technique in the context of a residential project that's still in the schematic design phase, but will be ultimately constructed in the Venice neighborhood of LA. The property itself is really long and narrow, but we wanted each room to have an adjacent outdoor space. And so by implementing this forced perspective strategy, we can create the perception of larger, deeper outdoor balconies where the dimensions of the lot actually limit their size. And so these drawings and diagrams are just small vignettes that we've been studying, representing very initial conceptual studies, looking at the scale of a single individual room at a time, and exploring the spatial implications of the use of forced perspective, and the resulting form in some cases where multiple forced perspectives are placed together. We plan to implement this strategy into distinct moments in the house and also take advantage of the residual qualities of light and shadow that happen as a result of this formal strategy. And these various vignettes specifically look at forced perspective as a means of connecting interior to exterior in both a single level condition as well as when a second level is introduced. Developing our architectural design theory and techniques is an ongoing process for us, based on empirical evidence we've pulled together from sources. But for us, an ideal next step would be to identify some resources and collaborators to actually develop studies and test some of these ideas of expansiveness that we've been cataloging. Thank you.